we were really a value add when it came to bringing on distributors, because I find that it is a chicken and egg. You know, distributors want to know how many restaurants you have, and most restaurants want to know what distributor you work with. And at the beginning of your business, you can kind of be in limbo.
You're listening to Stories from the Top, an inside guide to better business development. So we're here with Amy Zitelman, the CEO of Soom Foods. Amy, thanks so much for coming in.
My
For
pleasure.
people who aren't familiar with the business, can you explain a little bit who you are and what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm co-founder and CEO of Soom Foods. We sell tahini and tahini products, and ideally I would have some, but we're in a little bit of a transition with inventory right now. We can talk about that later. Tahini, for those that are unfamiliar, is an ingredient made from 100% roasted and pressed sesame seeds. It's probably most familiar here because you use it to make hummus. So about 13 years ago, when my middle sister Jackie was getting settled abroad, she lives in Israel, she ended up marrying and at the time was dating an Israeli in the tahina, as they say in Hebrew and Arabic industry. And my oldest sister Shelby, getting to know Omri, our brother-in-law, and seeing how tahini was really appreciated there, wondered what the tahini market looked like here. And what we found was kind of abysmal, that you could only find tahini on the bottom shelf of the international aisle. It was really separated and old, and the branding was not very clear, and that most people had no idea what to do with it besides make hummus if they did end up purchasing it. So we kind of were dumb and young, we like to joke, and we said, why don't we try to make tahini a more popular ingredient in the American market?
So what was your strategy when you started? Did you guys come up with a business plan or just dive into it?
Shelby studied entrepreneurial management at Wharton. That's where she got her undergraduate degree and kind of what helped us get settled here in Philly. And so she was good at that kind of stuff, like making a business plan and getting started. I studied, though, interpersonal communication. So I came to it from a perspective of like behavioral psychology and persuasion and negotiation, which were some of the courses that I had just taken. But yes, we did make a business plan. Originally, we thought that we would bring tahini over and get it in every grocery store that we could find. And we also made a list of restaurants and cafes and smoothie shops that we thought could make the product too, because that mirrored what we saw as the distribution for tahini in the Middle East. But once we really got going, we realized that our distribution options were much smaller. Most grocery stores, we've learned since, it's really hard to get on shelf, and it costs a lot of money to get off of shelves to really start generating velocity. And that was a hard lesson that we learned early on. And as we started talking to restaurants, we saw a huge opportunity with restaurants, because restaurants, when they use tahini, they buy more tahini and buy it more often than the regular consumer. You know, it might take somebody a year to go through a pound of tahini, and a restaurant could go through 40 pounds in a week. So that's what kind of helped shape the growth strategy that we ended up committing to. But early on, we just thought that we could sell tahini to everybody.
Did you dive straight into sales, or did you guys figure out product manufacturing and stuff like that first? Or
Great point. Yeah, it took us 18 months actually to get ready to start selling. So the idea came about in the spring of 2011. In 2012, I then lived in Israel to take a year off after college and to understand the culture and especially the cuisine a little bit better. We also went to Ethiopia for our first time. Most of our sesame seeds are sourced from the Humera region of Ethiopia. So we wanted to kind of better understand that, the part of the supply chain. And then I moved back to the Philly area, actually in with my aunt and uncle, at the beginning of 2013, and we started working on that first import. Our brother-in-law in Israel, because he knew tahini manufacturers, helped to introduce us to some. And so we, signed on to order 10 pallets from a manufacturer. We designed a label with one of my sister's friends and started working on that import. Once it got here, that's when I had made lists of grocery stores, co-ops, restaurants and cafes, and I just started really hitting the streets.
what was your guys' strategy for branding it? Since you knew this was kind of a new product for the U.S. consumer, what was the strategy to make it accessible but also keep its kind of natural mystique of a new product?
A really poor strategy, I would say, especially as it relates to like the aesthetics. We just didn't know a lot about branding. I would say our our strategy has always been consumer education. So we started making recipe cards really early on when I would demo at farmers markets or in the few co-ops that took us onto their shelves. I would sample the product, let people taste it, hand out those recipe cards so that if they brought it home, they knew it had something to do with it. So it was a lot focused on consumer education and really getting out there and sampling the product. That is what I think really differentiated us early on.
And what was it like making your first sale? Like, who did you sell it to? How did that first sale go down?
We have a really unique story because I have two kind of first sales. A few friends would say they were the first. My sister has a friend who said he bought it, off of her for $10 or whatever. Actually, the second date that I had with my now husband, he bought a case of tahini out of the trunk of my car. So he was one of the first people we sold to. But really, really instrumentally, in fact, our first sale was to Zahav Restaurant. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Zahav Restaurant. It's in Philadelphia. It's an Israeli restaurant that's been around now for about 15 years. So when we started working with them, they were still relatively young. And we met the chef at an event and we said, what tahini are you using at your restaurant? And he said the same thing that we were hearing from other people, which is, I have no idea what it's called and it's not very good. And we said, we're thinking about bringing great tahini over from Israel. And he was like, if you do, get in touch. And that's what we did. We got in touch once we got that first import. We brought samples and they committed on the spot to start purchasing the product. So they showed me, or really just instructed me, how to get to their loading dock and to kind of walk through their back hallway into their kitchen. And we delivered ourselves to Zahav Restaurant every week for almost 18 months before we secured a distributor. And they were instrumental because the restaurant was gaining a lot of attention and a lot of esteem, in fact. They ended up winning a lot of awards around the time that we started working with them. And most notably, they wrote a cookbook in 2015, 2016 or so, and mentioned Soom in that cookbook. That cookbook had a ton of success. It's called Zahav, The World of Israeli Cuisine or Cooking or something. And that really helped accelerate our brand credibility and also us being able to reach other chefs. Because the cool thing about the restaurant industry is when a restaurant is popular and that chef is popular, other chefs are really looking to them as an influencer as well. So they've provided a tremendous amount of support and great foundation for us.
So you said you met him at an event. What kind of an event was it? And did you just kind of like walk up and talk to him, or how did that go?
Yeah, it was an event at a synagogue, as far as I can recall. My sister Shelby, I'm pretty sure, saw him there. And that's one of the nice things. I'm sure you guys can relate if you're involved with your church, like just being involved in the community. But I went to a lot of other culinary events. There's a culinary festival every year to support Fringe Arts, which is like an arts program in Philadelphia. And they have a big thing. Philly Magazine does like the best of food or restaurants kind of gala. And I spent a lot of our money, buying a $200 ticket to that event so I could walk up to the table, introduce myself to the chef, and hopefully secure a time to come stop by with a sample afterwards. So we did really poke around some of those culinary events just to show face and get to know people. So those were instrumental for our early strategy. But we met him, I don't know what the event was at the synagogue. None of us had kids at the time, so I don't know why, but that's where they met.
Just putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
word of mouth marketing to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were you the CEO from the beginning?
No, I
I
wasn't
was gonna
actually.
say, how did you get to that position?
Yeah, my sister Shelby was CEO to start. And then actually pretty early on, we were doubtful because we were like three young people that had never had a food products business. Our family, we do have a long history of entrepreneurs we were talking about, including our maternal grandfather was a butcher and owned a sandwich shop in Philadelphia. And our paternal grandparents owned a restaurant. But we were never in not that we're the manufacturers, but in the sales and marketing and distribution of products. And we hired somebody in like 2015 that really didn't work out. After that, Shelby kind of firmly, my oldest sister, who studied entrepreneurial management, sat as that CEO seat. we were a small team, so we all wore a lot of hats, but I definitely was more so business development, sales, forward facing. I was the one at the farmers markets and sampling in grocery stores and really the face of the brand early on. It was when my sister had her third child in 2019 that she was just feeling, rightfully so, a little overwhelmed, and asked if we could switch, that she would be more COO and head of finance, and then I'd take over as CEO. And that was exciting and really fine to do. It was an easy transition, but it was the end of 2019, right when she was about to come back from maternity leave. It was COVID. So not only did she just have her third baby, but they were all stuck at home in whatever that was even called back in the day. And so she almost kind of never even came back full time to Soom after that. From there too, COVID really accelerated our growth in consumer channels. Up until 2019, we focused on the restaurant industry. Because of the success that we saw with Zahav, we looked to replicate that in markets across the country. And so over 70% of our revenue was coming from restaurants by 2019. A large part of it, too, about 20%, was coming from Amazon. Because we weren't in grocery stores across the country, we put our product available on Amazon pretty early on. And the last little bit was in a few hundred grocery stores, mostly in the Mid-Atlantic region. COVID, though, shut down the restaurants, luckily only for a few months, but still it was pretty startling. But at the same time, it really accelerated our growth on Amazon and in those few grocery stores that we were in. So that's when we decided to fundraise and commit more into actually rebranding the product, because from the beginning our branding was never great, and prepare for retail and consumer channel expansion. So we hired a fractional CFO, we hired a chief growth officer, and then Shelby really seamlessly kind of transitioned out of the company.
What would you say are some of the most challenging aspects of running a food business?
Yeah. One of the most challenging aspects is definitely cash flow, especially not being our own manufacturers. We need to buy the product before we sell the product. And then there's a lot of costs in the middle before you get paid. So cash flow is always a huge problem for consumer product-based business. I talk with other people that have product-based businesses, not necessarily even food, fashion, or supplements, or beauty, and they have a very similar challenge. The other thing is it's a very competitive space and margins are really low. I mean, Americans were blessed to have been trained to think that all food should be super affordable, and it should, don't get me wrong. I think before COVID too, we were grossly underpaying for how much it should cost to eat at a restaurant, for instance. So I think just training people to accept more reasonable prices that is good for the entire supply chain has been one of the challenges. But tahini is pretty unique. When people want to buy tahini, they're going to buy it. So if it goes up by 50 cents or, 25 cents here or there, we haven't seen a lot of challenges when we have had to increase prices because of the demands on the supply chain. Whereas bread is a lot more sensitive. Something that you buy every week, it matters if it costs $1 more or twice a week like I do. But tahini, when you just buy it every so often, it has a little bit more price elasticity.
So what was your guys' strategy to find distribution? You mentioned pretty early on while you had that first restaurant, you found your first distributor. What was your process to find someone like that?
We really work to acquire a few anchor accounts, like important restaurants that used a decent volume of tahini, and then ask them, what distributors do you work with? Hoping that they mostly work with the same distributor. And then once we have that very small economy of scale, we went to the distributor and said, hey, we're selling direct to 6 restaurants that are buying this much tahini. If you buy the tahini from us and help us sell it to the 6 restaurants that we already have, we'll work with your sales team to open up more restaurants. And in fact, we did a lot of the work on our own to open up restaurants even without their sales team's support. So we were really a value add when it came to bringing on distributors, because I find that it is a chicken and egg. Distributors want to know how many restaurants you have, and most restaurants want to know what distributor you work with. And at the beginning of your business, you can kind of be in limbo. Soom was lucky that we had a shelf-stable product, so tahini doesn't go bad for a long time and doesn't need to be refrigerated, so we could ship it across the country. We also got really lucky early on because our mother had a business in marketing and swag, pretty much like corporate gifts, and she had a FedEx account from the 80s. We were using her FedEx account and we had tremendous rates. I mean, comically low rates. We could send like 24 pounds of tahini for like $6. So we were all feeling great. Restaurants were buying it because the shipping wasn't too expensive. And years into the business, we got a call from FedEx, like trying to understand our business. And it turned out that our mom's company, CK Associates, happened to open up at the same time as a very large CK Associates. And they just kind of melded together in their system. And so they ripped away our really cheap rates. And then we found out that like our pricing strategy was really terrible and it was not sustainable to ship directly to restaurants. But luckily, we were already starting to garner that distributor supply chain that we were okay with it. But it was pretty funny when we found out that we beat the system a little bit.
So that was really pivotal that you guys did all the legwork to get that value for the distributors and you brought that to them.
That's right. And we see that across most industries, like with retail distributors too. You need the retailers to want you before the distributors want to sell you. And that is a very challenging thing to accomplish. But there are ways. There were more ways then. We could sell to Whole Foods directly. And once we were approved as a vendor in, let's say, this region, then I could go to the Whole Foods in Exton and ask to speak with the store manager and pitch them directly. And they could choose to bring on the product or not. Whole Foods doesn't work that way anymore. So I feel for people that are starting now because we had that kind of local and direct opportunity that doesn't exist anymore.
So how do they do it now?
Now you have to get the whole region pretty much at once. I think you can still go region by region, but you need to garner a lot of attention for your product and brand, and then submit during a submission timeline that Whole Foods has for specific categories. Those buyers review all the brands that are in front of them and look at their category set to decide their strategy. And then they'll invite brands for meetings, and somebody will decide whether you're going to get the 100 Mid-Atlantic stores now or not.
So what percentage of all these brands, you have all these different brands that they could choose from, what percentage would you say a store actually picks up to distribute?
Oh, I have no idea. That's a really great question. I mean, we're so unique because we sell tahini. There's not a lot of competition there. Within the category that we're in, it's the subcategory of nut and seed butters. So everything that's not peanut butter, but we're compared to almond butter. We're compared to cashew butter. We're even compared to Nutella in some markets, some retailers. But it's not like if they have 1 or 2 slots for tahini that we're up against 100 tahini brands. We're up against 5 tahini brands at this point, maybe, half a dozen. So that makes our position a lot more unique than somebody selling, which might be a award-winning, delicious, and healthy granola bar, but you're up against thousands of granola bars, so it makes it a lot harder.
So choosing this product is a product that's not really being served as much in the market.
I think ended up being a huge advantage for us, yeah. It's also something that, whether it was subconscious or conscious, it has made it a lot easier. It's also made it harder because I can still go to a store and hand out samples and say, are you familiar with tahini? And 6 out of 10 people have never heard of it. So it's not that it solves all issues, but as it relates to placement and distribution, we've found that being a niche product in a smaller category has helped us gain a lot of growth faster than other categories where we might have, been.
That's really cool. One question I had is, this was your guys' kind of sole product. Was the goal always to have just one product? I know you have expanded a little bit now.
The goal originally was, and now it's not, tahini still, because of its unfamiliarity or relatively newness to this market, has kind of a cap on its potential, max growth. So now we do want to introduce more products. But when I talked about the CEO that didn't work out early on in 2015, we developed with them a line of refrigerated tahini dips. They were delicious, but they were really premature because nobody even knew what tahini was. Nobody even understood what like a refrigerated tahini dip was. Why wasn't it hummus? How was it different than, your little deli cup of ranch dressing or whatever? And it took even more consumer education than tahini, and it was not shelf stable. So it was just a really hard 10 months that we were in that cycle. And that's when we kind of shedded other products and decided to focus on tahini. Our dad actually gave us a book called The One Thing. I forget who it's written by, but it's all about, there's a lot of times in life where you just need to prioritize, and the most important thing that you need to do should be the one thing that you're focusing on at a time. And that just really stuck with us. And we also had a lot of success by only selling one thing in a variety of sizes. We sell a 40-pound bucket down to a 1-ounce squeezed pack, for Blue Apron or something. But we were able to, I think, garner a great foundation for the brand and the company on one thing. It also made life just a lot easier. And with growing a business and a young family, it all just has worked out until then. But now we are feeling the excitement and also pressure with product development.
Yeah, I was going to ask what's next for you guys. What are you thinking for the future? Do you guys have like a big 5-10 year plan mapped out?
We're working on it. I have to admit, having grown the business with just one thing, my strength comes in that one thing. And I think the challenge with product development is more of like a psychological expression of me, like having a hard time figuring out what is next. It's hard because I want to love what we sell the same way I love tahini. And we've done that a couple times. We have a few chocolate spreads that we sell. They're like half the amount of sugar as Nutella and only a few ingredients, 3 ingredients in one, 4 in the other because it has sea salt in it. It has 5 grams of protein because of all the tahini in there. It's a delicious product, and it's always kind of fluttered along next to our tahini. And we also have a new line of snack bites because similarly in terms of life stages, I used to be able to be at home and make hummus and salads and like huge meals, and I loved cooking with tahini. And now with 3 young kids, I'm just looking for something that I can like throw across the kitchen island and like catch in their mouths. And that's not to mention for me to eat, something that I can keep in my car and eat when I didn't eat breakfast for like 3 days straight. And so these snack bites are great. They're made with dates, tahini, and oats, and just a handful of other real simple ingredients. We just launched them in 50 Whole Food stores in our area. So between Pennsylvania and DC, we're testing them there to see how they do and how we should position them. And then we hope to grow those too. But I'm currently engaged in a project with a contractor to hopefully build out a 5-year product development pipeline.
Very cool. If someone wants to find your guys' stuff, where do they go?
Sure. Well, you can go to Whole Foods nationally. It's typically on the bottom shelf of the nut butter section. We're also available on Amazon. We are on Thrive Market. We're in 1,000 Walmart stores and on Walmart.com now. So our distribution has grown a lot. We finished 2024 in over 4,500 stores and a lot of really great online retailers. We don't sell on our website, which is soomfoods.com, but you can find hundreds of recipes for tahini and our chocolate spreads there. So
And store locator too.
And store locator too. You got it.
Perfect. Well, Amy, thanks so much. We have 2 more episodes coming up. We're going to talk about distribution specifically and consumer education. So we'll dive into it again soon. But thanks so much for coming on the show.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Stories from the Top is your guide to successful business development. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find Edge of Cinema on YouTube. Stories from the Top is an Edge of Cinema production, hosted by Matthew Skura and Jeremy Schmidt. To learn more or get in touch, visit edgeofcinema.com/podcast.